Welcome back, everybody, to the High Conflict Co-Parenting Podcast with Brook Olsen. This week, I've got a special guest. It's Ken Childs from Paramount Investigations in Los Angeles. Welcome, Ken.
Good morning. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you here. This is a subject that, I've pondered a little bit over time and just I wasn't sure, and I'm really not fully sure how to get into the conversation with you today, but finding out what's going on in the background with clients has been a question that has occurred from time to time. And it's like, what's the process in that? But before we, start to jump into some of those questions, I'd like to hear just a little bit about your background, how you got into doing what you do, and then we can talk about what you do.
Sure. Yeah, so there are a few ways that people get into this industry. One's ex-law enforcement. I just happened to grow into this industry. So I was young, doing the community college thing and trying to get by, which in LA, which any major metropolitan area is very difficult. You have like the high cost of rent, food, and whatnot. So here it is. I'm working, and I ended up meeting a couple private investigators, and they took a liking to me, and they ended up hiring me. So a couple months later, I started retraining their talent in the office and just took off. And here it is 24 years later.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you started at this pretty damn young.
I started 2 weeks before my 21st birthday.
Nice. So you've grown into this career. So what are some of the things that are available for people in high conflict custody cases? What are some of the things that you find people go looking for and that become valuable for them in the process of showing up for court and creating documents that are going to be valuable for them?
So first off, you need a good attorney. You need a strong attorney. And then when it comes to us, the two services that are going to be utilized is going to be the background check and surveillance. And the reason why, obviously a background check is important because, either you're dealing with, like a good, outstanding citizen, or, someone has kind of a checkered past, or maybe they have a couple of DUIs on their record, and you definitely don't want your kids in their car, So background checks are obviously very important. And then surveillance is another tool that can be used kind of both ways, right? One for just kind of your personal knowledge on who's with your children, or are your children where they're supposed to be, and or I have a current case right now where a gal has sole custody of her children, and yet we can't find them. So 3 days of surveillance, no children. So so there are many ways one can use surveillance, and then another way surveillance can be used in court proceedings is to kind of demonstrate the lie, right? Let's say, and chances are this isn't going to be utilized by the majority of your clients, but let's say they start, trying to game the system, and they want more custody only because they want to reduce their monthly check to their spouse, right? And so they're going to claim that they don't work as much as they used to, and or insert some excuse here. And the reality is, these are individuals that we have to work. Our lifestyles are just too expensive: rent, food, everything else, you name it. So they have to work. And so what we would do is then show that they are working. We'll do surveillance, get them going to and from, stuff like that. So those are some examples of how you would use surveillance.
Okay. So, along those ideas of information gathering, which I think are some of the most important pieces, you're talking about, are they working? Do you have access or ways to track more personal types of information, like, say, financial trails or stuff like that? Is there a way that you are able to dig into that at all?
So the reality is, like, I don't recommend it. But what we can do, we have an ability to locate certain bank accounts, right? And so what we would then do is locate these accounts and then whisper to the attorney, hey, a little birdie told me that you should subpoena this account and or these credit cards and these finances. That's how that becomes useful or utilized, if you will.
Okay. So I think the important part of that conversation, the reason that I ask it is because along the way there has been a little bit like the way that you just stated that, an intimation that, we have ways to find stuff that, is there. And then the legal process for that becomes a subpoena. So you can find accounts, you can do those pieces and then pass it along to the attorneys for their use.
Right.
Is there anything in that process that becomes problematic?
So I utilize sources that get this information, and the problem is it's a gray area, right? Like, I don't want to know how they get this information. Let's just leave it that way, right? And so then from there, I would then tell the attorney, these are the accounts that you need to subpoena. That's how that becomes legal, right? Where typically an attorney is just going to issue blanket subpoenas to B of A, Wells Fargo, Chase, blah, 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 right? The usual suspects. And then if nothing of any value, if they're shaking the tree and no fruit falls out, they're kind of done. And then that's when you would utilize someone like myself. And then I would then rely on my sources and their abilities, and then I would just relay the information.
Okay. So, what are some of the other reasons that an attorney or a client would be in a strategy session and they would say, let's get some more information? What are the things that somebody would call you to get other than surveillance or background check type of stuff?
It's just typically, to me, it always boils down to those two, right? Because it's about information. Or maybe we would do what's considered, the Hollywood like trash run, right? There we are at, 2 a.m, like rummaging through somebody's trash. And though we don't do that often, we would do that if needed. And that has produced some pretty interesting results, because I had a chiropractor claiming that he didn't make any money. And what he was doing is just basically like he turned his business into a cash business, right? Because, as a chiropractor, you get very friendly with your clients, and then to your clients said, hey, what's $60? What's $150? So they just would start paying him cash. And then in this individual's trash, we saw notes that literally read, personal loan, 20K, personal loan to such and such, 30K. And we found vehicle registrations and stuff. So what we were able to do with that was prove to the court that this guy is earning much more because of his lifestyle and because of these loans that he's documenting in this nasty divorce.
So that brings up a really important conversation that I hear all of the time with many of my clients, is that I know that they're hiding money. I know that they are getting income. They've got a boat over here. They've got a car over there. They've got things that are not in their name necessarily. Is there a way to tie that kind of stuff back?
Sadly, I think that would take a little creative, kind of a creative workup, right? So you would have to determine, like, who's renting that boat slip, and or, what are they stating in those contracts? So what I would recommend to the attorney is to subpoena those contracts and see what he or she states in the contract, right? Because maybe the vessel's not in his name, but if he's claiming that that's his boat, and it's, and it's his slip and he's living there, then obviously we have our answer.
Is there, this is kind of a bookended question, Ken, but is there a process in which utilizing social media comes in to help this type of a process if somebody's being sloppy, or even if they're not?
It can help, absolutely, but it's going to boil down to what's publicly accessible. Sadly, like I know this isn't terribly sexy for me to just say like, oh yeah, like we can only gain access to what the average Joe can gain access to, right? That's the sad truth. There's no hacking, there's no gaining, some unrestricted access to this. But you'd be amazed at how many people just don't know their settings, and or let's say a person does have their account, semi-private, but then that doesn't mean that their friends don't have pictures of them out in, on the beach or shotgunning some beer or out with another person, or maybe with their, pic with them in their new car. So there are ways to do that, but sadly it just boils down to time. We have to spend time to dig into this and locate these accounts and then comb through the friends and all that other good stuff. So as you can see, it's very, when it's like a throw of the dice, right? You got to throw a couple, and maybe they don't pay off, but then the one that does hit, it hits pretty big.
Okay. So plant a lot of seeds and then see what pops up.
Absolutely.
Okay. So what are the legalities of utilizing this information? And then I've got another follow-up question with that.
So the legalities are, it's not a problem. You have to look at it like this. If the public can access it and we can access it, then there isn't a problem to supply this to the courts, right? I kind of find the easiest way to explain it is like trespassing, right? Like we can only go where the public can go. So if I'm sitting there testifying and they're like, well, where were you when you got this video? And it's like, okay, well, we were in our car at the curb, and we were in a location where anybody from the public can see this. And so I used the postal carrier as a demonstration. Like I was where any postal carrier can come and go from. It's kind of like the same thing with the internet, right? Like I'm just your average Joe. I just did a couple little searches and this is what popped up. Anybody can access it. So therefore, if they have it publicly accessible, it's admissible.
Okay. And you can't get behind any of the accesses to things like Instagram, Facebook, whatever. If it's not public, you can't go there.
Correct. You just cannot go there. And then even if you were to go there, right? Like let's say it was possible. How are you going to supply that to the court?
Okay.
You just can't go there.
Okay. But you can, and this is again, I think social media is such an open door for so much of the stuff that we're looking for, that if somebody on their Facebook page or their Instagram page is listing all the friends that they've got, then you can start poking around in those arenas and do that as well, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's say they have, a business named, and or we can go and tinker around and see what's going on with the business. Or, one case that comes to mind is a gal, and this is a new trend, by the way. So a lot of high-end divorces, you'll have someone claim that during that divorce that they were no longer able to work because of, it's like an insurance claim now. They're no longer able to work because they sustained these injuries, and therefore the spouse is going to need to pick up the slack for them. And this particular gal was claiming that she could no longer, I forget, but it was very extreme. Like she couldn't do X, Y, and Z, and she, didn't feel attractive anymore, and so no one's going to be able to go out with her. And then here it is, in her second social media account that she had hidden, like a little icon of a puppy dog, and we checked that out. And there she was, like raging in Vegas with like her sexy stilettos and pictures of her dancing. And the judge didn't care for that. Like obviously, if she can go out like rocking and rolling, then clearly she could take a job.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So again, you're back to people not paying attention to their settings and the breadcrumbs that they're leaving behind that you're good about picking up.
Right. So what this particular issue wasn't about settings. This was about her having a completely hidden second account, but then none of it was restricted. Right. So she thought she was clever.
Right.
And then that burned her in the end.
So you said this is a trend. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
I think it's just mainly because it's so hot topic today, right? We all have these like social media accounts. We're all kind of forced to, really, if you will. Business owners,
right.
Anybody that's within our age. This was the coolest thing that ever hit us because, maybe before my time, all you had access to like your past friends was just your yearbook and maybe phone numbers you hung on to. So the generation before me, it was the craziest thing that ever hit the planet, on through my generation. So typically someone's going to have a Facebook account, but now those that are younger than me obviously have different social media accounts and different settings. You have the young ones that just don't care and their whole life is exposed to everybody. And then you have those that belong to certain social media accounts where just everything deletes and vanishes. So I think it's just kind of the trend is just like talking about it and TV hyping it up. And so then therefore just kind of is de facto a trend.
There's a licensing that comes with your profession, right?
Yes. And make sure if for anything you hire a licensed private investigator. I know oftentimes you want to save a couple of bucks and you want to go with someone that's not licensed. Well, here's the problem with that. Let's say they do a great job and boom, they hit the gold mine of information and then they have video of them out doing whatever it is that they're saying they cannot do, or you discover the truth to these lies here. Now, how do you produce that to the courts? Like, you might be fine. And then the second, this person starts testifying and they find out they're unlicensed, they're going to throw it all out.
So is the licensure for this state specific, or does it span multiple states, or how does that work?
It's state specific. In the 50 states, there's about maybe 44, 45 states that require their own licensing. 5 or 6 states do not require licensing. And then some states are kind of wobblers, like Alaska, for example. If you live in Anchorage, they have a private investigator's license, but then there's no requirement. But anyways, yeah. And then California has probably one of the more strict licensing qualifications. So I think it's 6,000 hours, and then you need to take a test that's pretty intense. I want to say maybe 90 questions, and it takes about an hour and a half to 2 hours. And so, once you have your California license, you can actually apply for several other states, and they'll grant you that license. But yeah, it is a state-to-state basis.
And 6,000 hours, how do you get 6,000 hours by interning or apprenticing or something like that?
Yeah, so there are ways to go about doing it. Like when I first signed on with a major company that all they did was insurance surveillance. And so I did about 5 years, kind of 3 with them and then bouncing around, and I worked for a couple of ex-cops. And so that's how I gained all of my licensing experience.
So to get here, and when somebody's hiring you or hiring a licensed investigator, at least in California, there's a pretty good shot that they've got some experience underneath their belt, and they have some idea of what they're doing.
So here's a new trend that's going on in our industry that I absolutely, it's just appalling. So it's called a QM. So they changed the licensing because we're so liberal in California, right? We just love to give everything away. We feel bad for everybody here, have it for free. I know. Whatever. So anyway, so now the trend is in licensing is that if somebody is a qualified manager, I can literally like deem you a qualified manager today, and like de facto you have a license, and then I'm supposed to oversee you for the next 3 years, right?
Yep.
But technically, you can advertise as your own business. So it's very hard for consumers to distinguish the difference between a licensed investigator and a qualified manager because they name our license the same thing. So sadly, when you are looking for a private investigator, I think you need to dial in like their experience. How many years of experience have you had, and then how many references do you have? And then maybe go online and see what their business referrals are, right? Or see what their like 5-star reviews are like, and then that's the way you kind of determine if you have a real private investigator or someone that's just a qualified manager gaming the system. Sadly, you'll have a lot of private investigators that can't hack it in this industry. So what they do is they create a second avenue stream of income by qualifying managing these other investigators. They can have 5 of them out there, and then what they're doing is they're taking 10, 20% of their income off the top to like manage them. It's downright horrific. I don't know.
So what you have to do is you've got to investigate your investigator before you get your investigation started, right?
Yes, and by then you're qualified. You might as well be a private investigator yourself.
I kind of teed that one up for you because I think that's an important piece. The construction industry is very much the same. They can bring somebody in as a qualified managing person, and then they get their qualifications and they can go out and run amok. And it's unfortunate that that's part of the deal. Now, I want to go back because a lot of the people that are listening to this are all over the country. And if somebody was in, say, New Hampshire and they wanted to hire you, is there a way for them to do that? Or how do they go about, finding somebody? You mentioned a lot of that just now, but I think, for me, when I'm talking to one of my attorneys, they'll say, you gotta call this investigator, or this, I've got somebody that can get me what you're looking for, and I'm not going to tell you their name or whatever because there's stuff there that they're able to access, and it's interesting, and I want you to comment on that if you can.
Yeah, it sounds like the attorney is going to scrape a couple extra bucks off the top, is what it sounds like to me. Well, why wouldn't the attorney just say, "Hey, you know what? We got a couple of investigators that we utilize, and/or you can find one yourself, right?"
Mm-hmm.
Why don't they just like tee it up?
Okay.
Or hey, you know what? We know Ken. He's great. Here's his information. This is like what we're looking for as far as the legalities are, or this is what we want to chip away at. So why don't you two hash it out? I'll bring him and hire him in, and then all 3 of us will work together.
Okay. How many states do you service?
We just opened up Texas. So I have an investigator in Austin, so we can handle Austin, Dallas, and Houston.
Okay. That's got to be a hell of a crazy market.
It's going wild. All of us Californians are fleeing.
Yeah,
Texas is now serving up avocado toast now.
Right. Well, they're going to get used to the heat or not, right? I think about this information and the information gathering, and you talked a little bit about how this information can be used and the formats. Can you use, or have you used video surveillance in court, and how does that work, and what's the what's the recording of the legality of that? Does that boil down to your licensing being the key to be able to use that?
I would say the key to using surveillance is it's all about the lie, right? It's all about the lie. What did he or she say that we could prove is or isn't happening? So each and every situation is different, right? Let's say, for example, this young lady that I'm doing surveillance on right now, she's the sole provider for these children. Where are they? Where are these kids? Right? So I'm actually really concerned. But let's say there are other situations where, let's say someone's claiming that they're not working, they're no longer working. So then, of course, you would want to do surveillance and show that this individual is going out to the mechanic shop or, doing X, Y, and Z that they're claiming that they're not doing. So that's the key is you have to focus in on what the lies are, and then you then get videotape evidence of them doing that lie.
One of my concerns with my clients, I'm always looking for, and I'm sure that you're doing the same thing, is how can I best serve them in the most efficient way where I'm not wasting their time or their resources. And would you, if somebody were to call you and say, I'm looking at doing a surveillance, I think my husband or my wife is taking money under the table, and I know that they're working and this is what they do, where does that conversation become economically unfeasible?
Well, so I absolutely get where you're coming from, and that's why I have kind of a little bit more of a discussion on my end. And it doesn't sound like it's like the client's point of view, right? And I'm actually asking like tactical questions. Okay, so let's say, for example, she's claiming she no longer works, but you knew she worked at a bar, and or you have friends that have seen her working at the bar. Well, I'm not going to tell you like, hey, you know what? I need 7 days of surveillance at $1,000 a day. Well, let's have this discussion. Okay, so clearly she works at a bar. She has the kids Monday through, Thursday. Why would we do surveillance on those days? Why don't we hammer out Friday, Saturday, and see what, shake that tree and see what kind of fruit we get there. And that's going to bring that bill down significantly lower and bring much more value to the client.
So there's also a question that I often have is we've gathered this information, and I think that there's always a tactical approach to how to utilize the information. And is there places where we want to gather and just hold information for later? That what would that maybe look like?
Okay, so I would play it like a game of poker. Sometimes you may use us and never use the video. Sometimes you could use us, and it all boils down to like your team, right? It boils down to the husband or wife and the information that they can provide. It boils down to the lies that are being told, and then the strategy of the attorney, and then what we get. So sometimes it might be beneficial to hold it in your back pocket and then get the attorney to draw them out and lie one more time in court, and then lie again, because we all lie, right? We're human. It's what we do. And then maybe at that point you bring up that video for perjury testimony, and or if you're maybe in a volatile situation and the person's hostile and just kind of the moment where you can get them lying, and then maybe then and there might be the right opportunity to show them. But it all depends on the attorney, their strategy, and their abilities to get this individual to lie. And preferably you want them to lie on record, right? Mm-hmm. Through deposition and or statements to the court, like, oh, yes, Your Honor, like my circumstances haven't changed. I don't work. And then you're like, well, time out. Let's bring in Ken Childs here, who just got you, working 3 days straight when you're claiming you haven't worked in so long. And then not only did I get you working 3 days straight, I like spanned it out over a 4-week period. So I can definitely testify to this person working a full-time job, with these video clips and these pictures in my reports, right? But again, it's going to boil down to that team setting, the husband or wife and their ability to like gather information, the attorney who wants to legally focus on a couple of lives for them, and then how do we play it? How does it play out? Maybe in the early stages, you just straight hit them with everything. Boom, we got you lying. This is how it's going to be, and then boom, maybe it just works out right there. You call them on it. Or if you're later in the game and you get that video, you want to hold it back and get them to lie again. So like, I don't know, it's going to be on the attorney to play that strategy.
Are there particular attorneys that you work with, and are they like Los Angeles specific, or do you have attorneys all over California that you kind of have in your pocket that you work with?
First off, I hate attorneys. Okay, they're human. Sadly, the majority of them are car salesmen, and they will sell you on hiring them versus knowing what the hell they're doing. Like, and then once they get their money, boom, they pump the brakes on the case, and they put it in their back pocket, and you don't hear from them again. So I no longer refer. I have one gal that I refer attorneys to. One attorney client that I refer, and the rest is just going to have to be up to you.
That's important, because I kind of work a lot in the same manner. If I don't really know that attorney and had a long-term experience with them, I'm not going to put that piece out there. And the reason I ask the question is like, if somebody were to, I need this information, and I'm also looking for a good attorney, that's not something that you are going to push to.
No, I'll ask them to ask friends for referrals, because a friend referral to me would go a long way, right? Because that person has dealt with them, they've had good results with them, and that's what I recommend when it comes to finding an attorney. But like, I've dealt with attorneys that earned $1,900 an hour and were the worst people I've ever met in my life, the dumbest people I've ever met in my life. And then I've worked with attorneys that were $350 an hour, didn't bill for half their work, and they were assassins.
So I want to just expand this for a minute before we finish here, Ken. So if somebody is in Oklahoma or Minnesota or some other state, what are the questions that they want to ask of a potential investigator for them? So they're comfortable, and they're really pulling out the top line people.
I think the key is you just kind of have to jump online first, dial in maybe 5, 6, 7 investigators that you like, right, through Yelp reviews, Google reviews, maybe the top investigators that are kind of showing up in the city that you need, right? So let's say you're in Oklahoma, but you need someone in Los Angeles. And so you're going to go to Los Angeles, you're going to do a little bit of research. I would gather maybe 5 to 7 investigators, and I would call them. I would just lay it out. This is exactly what's going on. This is exactly what I need. And so what I find important are, do you mesh with that investigator? It is important, right, for you to mesh with them. And then number 2, do they understand exactly what your needs and wants are? Maybe they're able to help you with a little bit of strategy. That'd be terrific. And then I would boil that down to like 1 or 2, and then I would just go ahead and go from there. But the people that I would avoid are those that are, like into the fedora, into what they think a private investigator should be, right? Like, oh, I'm some super tough guy, and this is what I do. Like, who gives a shit? Like, I don't want you to be some tough guy. I've got this, 5'2" 110-pound soaking wet girl that works for me. She's an assassin. She'll gut these people. She's amazing. You know, like I don't need some like big tough guy who thinks he's gonna act like a PI. I want a real PI.
You know, I think of any profession in terms of a bell curve. And when I look at the bell curve, it's not stretched out. It's actually pretty tight in the middle. So it rises fast and it drops off fast. Exactly. And there's a whole lot of people on the left side of that bell curve that we don't want to touch. I mean, it's anything that is average to not good. I don't want my clients in, and that means that there is a cadre, there is a very small group of people that really know what they're doing and know how to get in and get it done and get out and be efficient. And that's the reason that I asked that question. So I kind of want to finish up here, Ken, with just a short assessment of how, when, and why somebody is going to call you. How are they going to use you? When is it appropriate? Why would they do that?
So again, it's all going to boil down on their specific situation, right? It could be a volatile divorce, which is what you and I deal with quite a bit. It could be maybe just a concerned parent wanting to know where their children are and or who their children are with. It could very well be a very high income earner that has a spouse now claiming injury and refusing to work as part of their divorce and trying to inflate the alimony payments. It could boil down to, you know, like, hey, I've got my children, I've got these, you know, young girls, and then my ex is bringing, she's dating now, and she's bringing a couple guys around. I'd like you to go ahead and kind of get in there, dial in who these individuals are, and do a little background check on them. Yeah, it adds up a little bit, but like there are people that have the ability, the means to do that. And so those are a few examples of why you would use a private investigator and what we can dial in for you.
Cool. Well, thanks for joining me today, Ken. This has been episode 147, How, When, and Why to Use a Private Investigator with Ken Childs of Paramount Investigations in Los Angeles. Look him up if you need him, and everybody come back for next week. Check his reviews and call him.
So check out my reviews. That's right. Well, Brooke, thank you so much. It was a pleasure, and keep doing the Lord's work.
Okay.